So we stop here. Actually, this is already related with the panel, so it's a very good way to to move to the panel.
Okay, thank you, Paolo. May I ask the panelists to take a seat, perhaps up here? I think Jean-Michel, I think Matthew volunteered also for the panel. So the question is here how to monetize decentralized communication. Now, of course, there are many different options that well, people might have in mind on how to do that, but many of these options, in fact, they fail when we do not have, you know, a centralized control over something. Because this is the point, as I explained also in my introduction, where someone like an operator can actually meter usage and actually charge that, right? So I don't know if someone wants to open the floor based on that as a question to the panel. Nobody? Okay. Because, I mean, after all, someone will have to pay for the infrastructure. So there is a mentality, at least for the final end users, that things on the internet tend to be free. Of course, we know that the intermediaries, so the people that are actually providing the service, they have to actually pay either to operate their own infrastructure or to pay someone that operates an infrastructure for them. So they have, of course, to balance out, you know, expenses and incomes and eventually generate some profits. I don't know, but maybe then we can collect opinions from here on how to monetize on these things. Now, I think you gave already a good intro, so I will skip you.
Okay. My perspective, actually, it's also very much aligned with what Tassos presented. So there are a few business opportunities that different stakeholders can try to exploit. For example, from the telco perspective, I think it's a good way to promote entrepreneurship, to have entrepreneurs and startups more sustainable, and to have them helping telcos to be more competitive. So I mean really to not just having the web players having this capacity to be more to be more agile, thanks to third parties that build apps on top of their APIs. But then these startups are really depending on these big web players and from their APIs. And with this decentralized approach, startups can really launch into the market services that can be sustainable even if the size of these startups are small. So, and telcos can have a role there, really to promote this kind of business. So to have small business, small startups being sustainable and helping telcos to have a richer portfolio. I mean, I'm talking about telcos, but of course other service providers can do the same. But I think from telcos perspective, that's a good opportunity.
I mean, this is a question near and dear to my heart, because whilst Matrix itself is a non-profit initiative, we obviously also need to find some money to pay the salary for the 16 people working on it. And we've looked at many different business models aside from the Matrix Software Foundation of the sort of things we could build on top. And there are many, many different models here. There's the classic professional services one, just going and providing consultancy to people who want to extend or build things on top of the protocol or the infrastructure, implement specific features, and just generally go and provide services like that. There's obviously hosting services too. Just because it's decentralized, even if it's an entirely peer-to-peer system like IPFS, there is still a point where you need to have a reliable copy of your data sitting on a server somewhere, and that's something very valuable that people can pay money for, and that telcos can definitely get involved in hosting. What other models are there? Well, I won't steal David's thunder on the sort of cryptocurrency models of funding things. But really, the model that we see is that even if the technology is completely open and decentralized, you can still, in a classic world, go and build islands of value on top of it, which is still interoperable. And indeed, when you bridge through to legacy systems, like possibly the PSTN, that's a really obvious place where telcos can make money because they own the gate to the PSTN, to SS7, to SMS, and all that good stuff. And well, you know, what better way than sort of monetize the link between the old world and the new?
Well, yeah, big question, and I cannot tell anyone as really the solution. Or it may be the next Sergey Brin or Larry Page or Mark Zuckerberg. Well, of course, you have the professional services where maybe telcos or other specialists in communication providers could really sell, I would say, premium services as for direct, you could say indirect through the. To bringing the ecosystem up and running and adding more people, more services, more sectors. Also, you know that in 5G we will take part in the digitalization of all the industries, and I think if, as Paulo said, the price to enter the game is lower, well, the most players we will have, and maybe the most money will be generated in the game. And well, yeah, of course.
Just a moment. Before, because there is a question from the remote view, and this is in fact a question for IPFS. So the question comes from William King, and it is, how would IPFS handle bad actors on the network?
So we have several. So again, IPFS, completely distributed, bad actors. We have to understand what kind of like bad actions they are doing. Again, we don't force anyone to store data unless they request it first. And even like if you request some piece of data, you are not forced to serve it to the rest of the network. You have the freedom to choose if you want to reshare it. So I don't know, if you are downloading some piece of content from a service that provides you a streaming music service or even like a offline music service, probably you don't have the legal rights to reshare that data unless the company gives you the rights to reshare as well so that their users can leverage that. Of course, like when talking about like a music company, they are not going to be a bad actor in the sense of like a malicious actor in the network. We do have a mechanism in place for IPFS that enables us to select which content gets easily, like, so when you are accessing some piece of content in IPFS, you access through the hash. And today, if someone tries to host or reshare some piece of content on the web, you can issue a DMCA takedown notice, and if a website has that piece of content on that on the portfolio of assets that the website has, like these takedown notices can even close the website down. Like can close entirely the web page. Even if someone shares a file, a picture that he didn't have the rights, but the person didn't know, like there is a legal way to throw down the website. But with IPFS, since you only need to block a unique hash, you don't need to block the entire website. You can actually selectively say, hey, like you don't have the right to reshare this content. And nodes of the network, like you should not be resharing this specific hash because this specific hash is behind some like kind of copy protection law, and the nodes of the network can just stop resharing it, like can accept that notification, and instead of like throwing entire websites down, throwing entire like sometimes businesses down because something is published that didn't have the right, and then someone acts maliciously and says, no, like you cannot share that anymore. Now they can just like selectively block a piece of content instead of like the entire website, the entire business. Well, I'm not sure if the person from watching remotely, like that answers the question.
Well, hopefully it answers the question, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I also happy to answer other questions by email or through IRC, where we are basically every day.
I'm afraid this one came through Slack. Sorry, Matthew.
I guess Matthew can fix that for us. So should I go back and answer?
Go back to the other question.
Can I go back? Okay, can I continue? So awesome. I have a longer answer to the one that I already gave during my talk, which is like at Protocol Labs, we saw two different ways to capitalize on the protocols that we develop. There is the more node model where people build services on top and they sell these services, sell these subscriptions, sell these guarantees, as Matthew was saying about like replicating data is a huge business. Like you can have a very efficient protocol to transfer data, but like putting replicas on the network, making the data available is a huge business, right? The other way that we saw to capitalize on the work that we are doing and a way to feed, like capture some of the value from the protocol and to direct that value towards the development is by attaching a direct measure to the network, a direct measure of value to the network. And that's where Filecoin comes in. So with Filecoin, we are creating this cryptocurrency incentivized storage network, but the cryptocurrency has a limit, like has a value in total, right? And when we, sorry, just organizing my thoughts. With this cryptocurrency deploying into the network, we can capture some of the value, some of the currency from the beginning, and then we are incentivized to increase the value of this network, the performance of the protocol, the adoption of the protocol. And as this network gets more widely used, the value of the currency also increases. It gets more valuable over time. And we have seen other cryptocurrency startups doing this in the past. Like they create some protocol, it's cryptocurrency incentivized, they capture some of the value, they capture some of the currency, and then as the protocol develops, they can start consuming that cryptocurrency that they captured and like feed it back to the development of the protocol. Okay, so that, okay.
Yeah, well, I would like to pitch in another question that is related to that and was circulating in my mind.
Yeah.
This currency that you invented, right? This is basically awarding people that store content, right?
Yes, it is your way.
But
yeah.
I mean, we have today, or over the last 40 years, we had this, let's say, 3 dimensions in computing and communication. So we had communication, we had storage, and we had computing. So we choose to recompute a value if computing is cheaper than transmitting the value over and over again. Or storing it in multiple places if storage is cheaper than communication. You see what I mean? There is always a balance between the cost of computing something, communicating something, or storing something, right?
Yes.
So I was wondering whether this this idea of awarding something for storing can be transposed, in fact, also to the communication part. You see? Or even to the computing part.
Yes, yes. So we are focused on cryptocurrency incentivized storage. There is no reason why you cannot like incentivize people that make available, like so Bitcoin is basically that, right? Like the miners are computing a proof of work and like they are feeding the network with that computing, of course. And for our misfortune, Bitcoin has this tremendous computing power attached to it, like way bigger than like the top 500 supercomputers. And like it is going out to waste. It's just like to computing these hashes so that like the blockchain can exist on the network. So like there is this super professional right now like an endeavor of sustaining the Bitcoin network and like lots of power, lots of money put into just like for the blockchain to exist. So imagine like if we can channel all that computing power to some useful work and make it not only exist to like sustain the blockchain, but also like to something that people can use and people can pay for those CPU cycles that are made available. And bandwidth can also enter in the equation as well. It can also be a protocol where people can open channels to each other, and depending on the most valuable channel, the one with better bandwidth, less latency, people can like sell that channel to others and be incentivized for it. So I feel that Matt has something to say.
Just before that, is there any more question? Okay, let Matthew answer that, and then you get the.
Oh, I wasn't going to answer directly to what David was just saying in terms of the evils of Bitcoin, but was just going to. An interesting anecdote happened about a month ago when we wrote an article about the importance of the decentralized web and put it on TechCrunch, and it went quite viral and had all sorts of conversations off the back of it. And one of the things which I wrote in the article was to describe GitHub as an example of how the decentralized web can be effectively monetized, which was deliberately a little bit controversial because GitHub is built on Git, completely open, decentralized protocol, and yet they go and provide sort of classic business model hosting of it, which is a very valuable business. I think it's what, $2-3 billion valuation currently. So I mean, clearly you can take a decentralized tech and build value on top. I thought it was an okay analogy, but the enthusiastic response we got from some people who were more positioning the Filecoin and the IPFS argument that it is almost immoral to take a fully decentralized technology and then build another service of value on top of it was a really interesting argument. And so basically I think there is a sort of fundamental, not battle, but almost two polar alternatives here between a completely decentralized approach, and the guy who was most vocal on this is called Nathan Schneider, who's a reporter at Vice and has written books on cooperatives, and he tweeted us saying, how is it that GitHub heralds a decentralized web? GitHub took a decentralized tool and centralized it, and then went on and on and on at me about how we should be launching a cryptocurrency. So, I mean, that's basically the choice that you see for monetizing this. From our side on Matrix, we've gone down the boring model, well, not with the Matrix hat on, but say the Riot app is using the boring conventional model because it's almost another company's worth in its own right to get the cryptocurrency right. So we have a lot of respect for the IPFS guys going for the more sort of philosophically pure approach, shall we say. Sorry.
Yeah, my question, it's not exactly on the same topic, but so currently what we have is successful internet businesses building large infrastructure. Google has lots of data center, Facebook has lots of data center. Those who don't have data centers buy services from content distribution networks. So I feel that the assuring the quality of service, so having control over the quality of experience, the delivery of the service, must be a very big part of the business, otherwise they wouldn't invest so much money in it. So reTHINK and IPFS propose a different model, more decentralized, more peer-to-peer, but one of the disadvantages will be, so on one hand it significantly lowers costs, facilitates new startups, business entering a new business, etc. But on the other hand, we'll have to give up control on the quality of service, I imagine, so, or somewhat, or give up some control. Do you think this, given this trade-off, will we see successful companies which start with this distributed model eventually as they become big enough going to a centralized model? Or do you ever see the ones currently using a centralized model moving to this one?
So, okay, with me answering, or at least trying to start answering that. So I'm not sure if I entirely, this is not working? Okay. I'm not sure if I entirely agree with it has to be a trade-off where, like, for distributed technologies to work and be pervasive, like, companies have to lose control of the quality of the experience. I think there are two different things. One thing is, like, as you said, and well, there's a lot of business opportunities in building infrastructure, and better protocols enables us to build better infrastructure. And right now, as it was referenced several times, there's a lot of silos, and it is really hard to move data from a service provider to another service provider. And it seems to me that it's a natural evolution that once there is a technology in place, the primitives to move data around in a way that's like very efficient and really good for the users will start preferring like being able to use services that don't log them into a provider. I guess like picking up the GitHub example, like again, GitHub is centralized in the sense of like support on premise, like training. They offer also like you can host all your Git repos on GitHub, but at any point in time, you can get your Git repos and go to some other company that hosts Git projects. Of course, they try to like get you in by the nice experience of GitHub issues and other features there. But again, Git is a distributed protocol. Like you can have your own premise, you can host your own service, you can move in and out of GitHub as many times as you want, and they offer the value proposition there is really on the experience. And they didn't lose the ability to do that even over a distributed protocol.
Yeah, maybe an answer from a telecom operator on the quality of service.
No, but there is, I mean, it's almost a common law that for mass market services, QoS appears not critical to the common user. I mean, everybody may have experience a bad transmission or YouTube or Dailymotion, but most people don't care really about it. In professional or in critical applications, there you could probably monetize the value of QoS. More generally, as quality of experience, that's another way.
Just quickly from my side, yeah, I agree completely with that, especially that QoS in the end is only as good as the last mile. And it's all very well having 99.99999% uptime in your backbone if all of your subscribers are on a link that drops out 30% of the time. But in addition to that, it's worth noting, we've got a concrete example of this. Look at the original Skype, completely decentralized, completely peer-to-peer against the PSTN. And you can look very quantifiably at the difference between them. The call setup was like 2-3 seconds on Skype, rather than possibly a couple of 100 milliseconds on the PSTN. Do the consumers care? No. Skype ends up being ridiculously popular. And likewise, yeah, the GitHub example is a classic one of how you can mix the two together, but also BitTorrent seems to do pretty well as a way of transferring files around the place as a completely decentralized system. So yes, the cost is slightly worse, and the development overhead is a bit more complicated, but it's not enough to be a showstopper at all. And we've had a really interesting argument going on with Signal, and Moxie Marlin Spike, who runs Open Whisper Systems, who makes Signal, about centralization versus decentralization, because Signal is aggressively centralized, which is interesting for a privacy-protecting end-to-end messenger. So for instance, if you were a country and you didn't like Signal, then your government can just block it, because it's centralized, which feels like a very strange thing to have in a so-called privacy-protecting application. And back in San Francisco in June, when everybody got together for the Decentralized Web Summit, I ended up going and spending an afternoon arguing in a very fancy tea shop with Moxie about the benefits of centralization versus decentralization, and it was very much this whole question, not from the cost perspective, but basically, we estimated that to build a decentralized system is about 5 times harder than a centralized one, at least, possibly an order of magnitude harder. So why would you do that, especially if it's a privacy-protecting system where any more complexity is going to give more room for bugs, which makes it less secure? So the argument kind of goes back and forth, and he does blog posts talking about why decentralization is bad and vice versa. And basically, yeah, it's not an obvious answer and a very debatable one, but we think that freedom is as important as privacy in the end.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other question from the audience? Yes, here is one.
Hello. It seems to me that apparently both Matrix and reTHINK are trying to cover a bit the same goal of making interoperable different silos, the multiple silos. How do you see this? It's really a common goal? You see some kind of merge in the future? What's your thoughts, Matthew and someone?
Okay, I was expecting that one. That's why we are together, right? Actually, so I do know Matrix for some time, and actually in reTHINK we are using Matrix. So we are trying to also to demonstrate that somehow we complement each other. Of course, there are some overlaps, but at the end, I think that we can complement each other. And IPFS, something that at least I just knew a couple of months ago. Unfortunately, it was too late to have it in reTHINK from the very beginning, but hopefully we would still be able to have something. But again, I think that very much we also complement each other. And yes, we are looking forward to cooperate and have something done together.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that entirely, in that it's very different architectures between the Hyper-T going and dynamically loading JavaScript in rather than having a protocol, whereas Matrix is a protocol on the end. And I think it's critical that we have different architectures being investigated, whether it's a purely peer-to-peer approach or a more classic federated approach or the more sort of hybrid dynamic approach that reTHINK is going for. And it's really, really exciting to see the different angles here. And we were talking about this just before the session, that historically the space has suffered enormously like 3-4 years ago, that everybody had their own special snowflake decentralized protocol that was going to change everything. And you look at the decentralized social space of Diaspora and Pump and GNU Social and Identica, and literally there's a list of about 40 very, very similar projects, all of which are basically a 1 or 2 person organization, all desperately competing to be the next new thing, and it's a bit unfair, but I think that if any of those guys had actually collaborated a little bit better and possibly sat on some panels at some conferences and exchanged ideas, then Facebook might not be in quite such the dominant position it is today. So I think it's great that nowadays hopefully people are more aware of that, and we're all very interested in working together. As in, we're looking at using IPFS for the file transport in Matrix, because at the moment we have a very crappy thing, as I mentioned in my talk earlier, simple HTTP-based replication rather than a funky DHT-based thing. Everybody shares the same problem of decentralized reputation, and it's really exciting to see the decentralized identity stuff that's coming out of reTHINK. I mean, we just do not have that at all in Matrix right now, and I'd be very happy to borrow it / leverage it for Matrix. And I mean, they're basically, everybody's got different areas of speciality. There isn't a total overlap, thankfully, and it's really exciting.
Okay, unless there is any more desire or questions from the audience, I was asked to more or less close the panel around 6 o'clock. So it is 3 minutes after 6. So having said that, and no more questions from the audience, I think I would like to thank the panelists here very much. Thank you for sharing your opinions, your thoughts with us and the audience, of course. And okay, thank you.